Welcome to Martian Mixed Martial Arts.
Wow. Wouldn't it be crazy if the aliens manufactured you to be a mixed martial arts fighter? They're like, let's see if we could just turn this.
I'm sure if it would have happened, I would have been much better than this.
Much better than this. You're the fucking champion. What are you talking about?
Yeah, but if I would be alien manufacturer, I would be Superman.
Hello, ladies, gentlemen, boys, girls, aliens, Martians, any conscious beings tuning into the podcast. I welcome you to episode 45 of Martian Mixed Martial Arts. This week we will be previewing the UFC 232 pay-per-view going down in Los Angeles, California this Saturday night, December 29th, 2018. At the end of the podcast, we will also quickly recap the UFC on Fox Lee versus Iaquinta card that went down 2 weekends ago on December 15th. I'm switching up the usual method of the podcast. I figured that more people would be wanting to tune in about the current event instead of sitting through a recap of the previous event. So I think from now on I'm going to do the recaps of the previous events at the end of the show and start things off with just getting right into the fights for the UFC that weekend. So that's going to take effect this episode. So we're going to get right into UFC 232. But before we talk about the first fight, we have to talk about the elephant in the room, the fact that this fight is no longer taking place in Las Vegas, Nevada, and has been transferred, I guess you could call it, to Los Angeles, California on 6 days' notice. A totally unheard of thing in modern mixed martial arts. I believe this happened in maybe the early or mid 90s with the UFC when states didn't really have athletic commissions sanctioning MMA, and there were always some last minute changes in the events back then. I believe the fight was supposed to happen in Colorado and something went wrong and they had to fly all the fighters to Alabama instead to fight. So sort of a similar situation here, but the reason why this fight is moving is just fascinating. We have the UFC right now. The UFC president Dana White, Jeff Nowitzki, the director of USADA. We have media, UFC shill media, all saying that there's no failed drug test here. There's no new intake of any performance enhancing drugs. There's no new anything. But that's not the case. That's not the case at all. That may be the narrative that everyone is pushing right now, but that is not the case at all. So what happened is Jon Jones tested positive for trace amounts of a steroid metabolite. They say not enough of a trace to make it possible for consumption. That's what Dana White is saying right now, that it's so little that he couldn't have possibly taken anything because it would show up as more. Again, what a fake narrative that is being pushed right now. They're basically saying anything they can to keep this fight happening, and if they have to lie and scheme or their way around it to make this fight happen, that is what they're doing. So you have everyone saying Jones did nothing wrong. He didn't do it. He didn't take anything new. He didn't. That's just bullshit, man. Jon Jones has been taking performance enhancing drugs his entire career. He tested positive for the exact same substance last year and received a 15-month suspension for it. Should have been longer. It should have been 2 years minimum, maximum 4 years, but it got reduced to 15 months for the snitch clause in the USADA deal. Not speculating either. He 100%. The reason why his suspension got reduced was because he provided information on other athletes in order to reduce his suspension. That is not. It's not a rumor. It's not a speculation. It's not talking shit. That is what happened with Jon Jones. Now, a year and a half later, fast forward, he's getting his fight is back on and everything like that. He's got his license renewed, and bam, he pops again, and for the same exact substance he did last time. The narrative that is being pushed by USADA right now by Jeff Nowitzki is saying that the same drug that he took last July has stayed in his system for the past 17 months and has just resurfaced in trace amounts on his last test, even though he has taken tests before and after that have had no trace amounts. So I think it was December 9th is the test that popped. Maybe December 8th or whatever, that test was clean. The December 10th test was clean. The December 9th test was dirty, and they said it's just it just washed back ashore. The steroids that were in his system just resurfaced somehow. Even though Jeff Nowitzki, the director of USADA, has clearly stated on Joe Rogan's podcast that turinabol cannot stay in your system for more than a few months, usually weeks, months at the latest. He's on record. You could listen to a video of him saying that oral turinabol only stays in your system for maximum 3 months, and all of a sudden he's now saying that 17 months later that same steroid is in Jon's system. Like I said, man, this is just a big ruse, a big, farce. They're creating this whole fake. Oh, Jon didn't do anything wrong. He didn't. No, he did. He took the same exact steroid, except this time his doctor, cycled it out of his system a little faster. Not fast enough to get it completely removed from the test, but enough to say that it's only trace amounts. Say that it's only a little bit. The little bit that they're going to the longest extent they can to say that Jon Jones hasn't done anything wrong. This analogy that if they took a grain of salt on a table and crushed it into 50 million pieces, one of those little pieces would be the amount that Jones had in his system, or a grain of sand in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. They keep using all these analogies to say that Jon didn't do anything wrong. It was just a tiny let me give an example about how tiny it is. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how tiny it is. Other athletes, other fighters have been suspended for less or the same amount that Jon has tested positive for. It's just because Jon has had problems with USADA before. He's had provided assistance to USADA before. He's the main event of this card. It's the last card of the year. It's a huge rematch they've been building. It's for a vacant title. It's for all it's got a lot on the line. They didn't want to just scrap this main event and have a disaster 6 days out. So what they decided to do is just come up with this narrative and move the fight. We could keep talking about this for a few more minutes. There's a lot to explain, man. The amount that Jon tested positive for was 60 picograms. People keep saying it was 60 picograms. That's it. Picograms, I'm pretty sure, is like a trillionth of a gram or something like that, or a millionth. So 60 picograms. That's it, right? But except for it's 60 picograms per liter. Okay, so all of a sudden it went from 60 to 60 per liter. It's okay, how many liters are in there's 60 milliliters in a typical urine sample. So 60 times 60, that's 3,600 picograms. So Jeff Nowitzki gave the example for 1 picogram. He said it is 1 millionth of a gram, or 1 sea salt. He didn't give the analogy for 3,600. I'd like to hear the analogy for how many. What size 3,600 picograms is equivalent to? What is it? Is it a grain of salt now? Is it a fingernail? A pencil tip? What the hell is it? There's been very little clear explanation about this. You hope to hear more on Joe Rogan's podcast tomorrow. He's allegedly having Jeff Nowitzki, the USADA director, on his podcast to explain the situation, but I have zero interest in listening to that situation because he works for the UFC. He's pushing the narrative the UFC wants to push, and he is lying out his ass right now. It's insane. This guy went from being a credible, whatever you call him, drug tester, a credible scientist, and to the past couple years, he's been controlled by the UFC, making decisions that are in the UFC's best interest, and he has to, wiggle around the lines of the USADA protocol to make the UFC happy. So it doesn't matter that they have a no tolerance policy, and Tom Lawler has been, Tom Lawler got suspended for a smaller amount of picograms than Jon Jones is. It didn't matter it matters that they need the UFC to succeed, so Jeff Nowitzki does whatever he feels the UFC wants them to. So I guarantee that podcast is going to be, you're just going to have smoke blown up your ass for the entire time you listen to that podcast. Joe Rogan works for the UFC, love the guy to death, but the pay-per-view is 2 days away. He's not going to be asking any too hard questions, if they know that this thing is in jeopardy. If he asks, a question that clearly reveals the truth. Hey, Jeff, does Dana White have any say in whether these tests go suspended or not, or why was Tom Lawler suspended and Jon Jones not? He's not going to ask those hard questions. He's going to cover Jon Jones's ass and make sure this pay-per-view goes down without problem in 2 days. I mean, it's just incredible, man. This sport, man. Jon Jones, the most problematic fighter in the history of the UFC by far. Beats out Conor McGregor by far. Beats out Brock Lesnar by far. Any other guy who's tested positive. Matt Riddle, Nick Diaz, all of them. Not even close to Jon Jones, man. He's failed, three drug tests before for cocaine, for steroid. No, this is his fourth. Well, they're not ruling it a fail, but this is his fourth drug test with the complication. The cocaine test, the steroid test that pulled him off of 200, the steroid test after 214, and now this test before 232. So, man. Not to mention his multiple hit and runs and his arrests and everything like that. He's the most problematic fighter in the history of the sport, and I don't think anybody else. Maybe Conor, if he keeps up the same rate that he's going right now, he'll catch up soon. But man, Jon Jones has the number on Conor right now. So the logistics behind this change of event are insane. I can't imagine on 6 days' notice having to change 26 fighters, hotels, their corners, hotels, not to mention the fans in Vegas who, planned vacations around this, got tickets, got hotels, got flights, everything like that. Probably had their Christmases ruined. It's a really shitty situation, man. But honestly, I'm still grateful the fight is happening. I'm not mad at Jon Jones. I'm not, this steroid cheat. Fuck it, man. He's the greatest fighter who's ever walked the face of the earth. Who cares if he has 3,600 picograms of, steroids in his system? I really don't. It's just the fact that this USADA program is a joke, and they continue to make a joke out of it. They continue to abuse it and, give stars leverage, give people who draw leverage, and, it doesn't make any sense. There's 500 guys on the roster who are getting their dicks or their vaginas stared at by scientists, watching them pee in the cups, getting their blood drawn, knocking on the door at 6 a.m., having to do all this shit, thinking that this sport is going to be cleaned up. But that's just a lie, man. It's all none of that is happening. And they're doing all of this unnecessarily. They're watching people piss, and they're taking their blood, and they're showing up to their house and their gym and their job at various times of the day for no fucking reason. Because if a person fails one of those tests, there's leverage to get out of it. If you're a star, though. If you're not, Tom Lawler, sorry, man, you don't draw numbers. You pop for 16 picograms, bam, suspended. It's just a terrible, terrible program. I've ranted about USADA on this podcast, for probably hours before. It's one of the worst things in the UFC right now. Reebok, USADA, and those are the two, and weight cutting, I guess, are the biggest problems in the UFC. But we'll talk a little bit more about the fight, the main event, Jon Jones fight, at the end of the program. But we're going to start things off at the bottom of this card. We have a 13-fight card going down. We got, let's see, how many fights on, we have a 5-fight main card, and that means we have 3 fights on the prelims, I believe, maybe 4. So we'll start things off on the Fight Pass prelims. We have Brian Kelleher, who is 19-9, taking on Montel Jackson, who is 6-1. This fight has been scheduled before, and it was canceled. The first time this fight was scheduled to take place, Brian Kelleher opened up as a -185 favorite to Jackson at +145. But the second time this line was opened up, Kelleher opened as the underdog at +125. Montel Jackson at -145. So that's a very interesting switch. And now the line currently sits at Kelleher +145, Montel Jackson +165. So, despite them never fighting, the betting line has flipped in this one. You know, the odds makers obviously saw the action coming in on Jackson, coming in last fight and decided to open the line differently this time. But very interesting, man. This should be a good fight at bantamweight. Both of these guys are really good fighters at bantamweight. Montel Jackson hasn't really shown it in the UFC so far. He's only had one fight, and that fight was a loss. He looked pretty underwhelming in that fight. You know, he came in against Ricky Simone, you know, a terrific wrestler, and was just, you know, taken down repetitively in that fight, and dominated off his back. He is claimed to be a great striker. He does have good striking, got huge hands, and he's a real long guy for bantamweight, and that's where he's going to be trying to keep this fight at range and using his jab and working behind power punches, keeping it at distance. Kelleher is going to be trying to close that distance, throwing hooks, throwing bombs. This guy throws heavy, man. He is a great pressure fighter. He eats shots. He's got a great chin. He's coming off a loss as well against John Lineker, but man, what an incredible war that fight was. He dished out some good shots to Lineker. He ate some, and eventually he went down in the third round via knockout. But man, he has some very impressive wins in the UFC. He's finished Damian Stasiak and Yuri Alcantara. He's also got wins over Julio Arce in the regionals back in Ring of Combat, and he's got a win over former champ Renan Barão. So Brian Kelleher has the much more accomplished resume. I just named five legit wins on his resume, 5 legit UFC caliber wins. While Montel Jackson has wins, his competition has actually been pretty good for the regional scene. But man, 3-1, 4-0, 9-1. Those are good records for regional fighters, but they're just not UFC level. They don't match up with Kelleher's resume at all. So, resumes aside, I think that Kelleher is going to have success closing the distance in this one. I think he's going to make Montel Jackson uncomfortable, and I don't think that unless Montel Jackson really shows up, looking much improved from his last fight, then I don't think that Montel Jackson is going to have enough to keep this fight at distance and outstrike Brian Kelleher. So the pick is going to be Kelleher to get the win, and at plus 145, honestly, I really like a play at Brian Kelleher. Moving along to the welterweight division, we have Curtis Millender, who is 16-3, taking on CR Badarazara, who is 24-6-1. The betting line for this one opened up Millender minus 200. Favorite to Badarazara at plus 170, and line margins are tightening up a bit. Badarazara is now plus 130 with Millender at minus 150. Another incredible fight on this card to kick things off. Curtis Millender is I believe he's a very well accomplished kickboxer. He's got to be with his impressive striking skills. I don't remember. I remember studying him a lot around his UFC debut before he fought Thiago Alves, and watched a good bit of tape on him. So I don't remember if he's a kickboxer or not, but I would not be surprised at all with his style. He likes to keep it standing. He's got great kicks, head kicks especially, man. He's great knees. He's a real long, lengthy fighter. He beat Max Griffin in his last fight, and in a very impressive fight. He was taken down in the first round against Griffin. Kind of looked like a bit of a fish out of water on the ground. Didn't look too good off his back, but his cardio was on point, his IQ was on point, and he knew that he couldn't make any more mistakes. He couldn't get taken down anymore, and he would have to win the latter 2 rounds, outstriking Max Griffin, and that's exactly what he did, picking up the decision victory in that one. So I was riding high on Millender a little bit for the first 2 fights. I was I picked him in both of those fights, but I think I'm gonna go with Badarazara in this one, man. Badarazara is just the much more well-rounded fighter. He's good. Millender is gonna be the better striker in there, no doubt. But don't forget about Badarazara, man. He's got great striking. He's got good kicks. He's got power punches. He's got power all over. He's also a great grappler, man. He's got some good submissions on his resume, and he's also a great wrestler too. So Badarazar is the much more well-rounded opponent. I think that he's going to see he fights smart too. He's fought some high-level guys before, and he's come in with a good game plan and he's beaten them. So I think he's going to see that Melender's weakness is on the ground, and I think that he's going to try to exploit that. Going for the sub. So I think that Badarazar is going to be trying to close the distance, shooting for a takedown and getting the submission, while Melender is going to be trying to keep this fight at range, landing head kicks and knees, and I very well could see Melender keeping this fight at striking range and avoiding the takedown, avoiding being on his back. That's very possible that could happen. But at the current odds, I would honestly put Badarazar as the favorite. I just think he has more ways to win this fight. I think that he honestly could win this fight standing too. I think he could catch Melender with some power shot and maybe rat him a little bit. But I think that if Badarazar gets the win in this fight, his most likely path is via the submission. So earlier in the week, his submission line was at maybe plus 700 or more. So if you got to jump on that line, congratulations too. I think it's down right around plus or 500 or 600 right now. Even at that, it still has great value. So the pick is going to be the Afghani CR Badarazar to get the win in this one. Moving on to the next fight, which takes place in the middleweight division, we have Uriah Hall, who is 13-9, taking on Bevon Lewis, who is 6-0. The betting line for this one opened up Uriah Hall as the underdog at plus 105. I don't know if it's Bevion or Bevon Lewis at minus 125. Since then, people have been, money's been coming in on this line all week, flipping each fighter from a favorite to a dog. Right now, we stand at even money at minus 110, minus 110. This is a pretty even fight. Bevon Lewis is, he's a good striker. He's got some power on the feet. He's coming off of a nice win on Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender Series, a nice knockout knee win over Alton Cunningham. Has also beat some good competition in his regional debut, in his regional fights, and he's taken on a seasoned veteran in Uriah Hall. Uriah Hall, showed some real tenacity in his last fight. He went out on a shield, getting knocked out by Paulo Costa, but was looking pretty good. Up until then, he was, fighting behind a jab and doing some damage to Costa, making it a really close fight. But he ended up getting knocked out in the second round of that one. He's really been struggling lately. He was losing that fight to Krzysztof Joko before he caught him with a punch and won that one. And then he lost to Whitaker, Brunson, Musasi. So he's 1-4 in his last 5. He's really struggling. That's why we see, Bevon Lewis, a new UFC newcomer coming in here, getting that minus 110, minus 110 price on Lewis against Hall, because he's so worn lately. So I think this is going to be a very close fight. It's going to be a striking battle. I think that Uriah Hall will probably be the more technical striker, but Lewis will be throwing more power. So I really can't trust Uriah Hall to at even money to fight to a decision, fight safe, and not get caught at this point in his career. And I don't think I'd really trust the money on Lewis, fighting such a veteran in Uriah Hall, an experienced guy in Uriah Hall in his first fight in the UFC. So I think that this is a very accurately set betting line, and I'm just gonna pass on this one in terms of the betting aspect. But for predictions, I'm gonna pick Uriah Hall to get the win in this one. Next fight in the bantamweight division, we have Nathaniel Wood, who is 14-3, taking on Andre Ewell, who is 14-4. The betting line for this one opened up as a pick'em fight at minus 110 for both fighters. Again, a lot of action coming in on both of these fighters all week, flipping them from dog to favorite. Right now, Ewell currently sits at the favorite at minus 115, Nathaniel Wood at minus 105. So very, very close matchup in this one. Nathaniel Wood is, he's coming off of an impressive win over Johnny Eduardo, a Darce choke over Johnny Eduardo. He's got a really good ground game. He's got a little bit of power on the feet too, so he's a very well-rounded fighter. I think he is actually the more more well-rounded fighter than Andre Ewell in this spot. So I think Ewell has got he's got good striking, he's got a little bit of pop in the hands. We saw him make his UFC debut against Renan Barão, the former champion in Brazil, I believe, also. So, and he was able to win that fight, and pretty impressive fashion in getting the decision in that one. Looked like he got stunned by a punch in the first round of the fight, but was able to take over, show some good cardio, and win that fight against the former champion. So, very impressive debut in that fight, along with Nathaniel Wood having a very impressive debut in his fight against Johnny Eduardo. So again, I'm going to agree with the betting line in this one, thinking that it's a pretty even matchup. I think that Andre Ewell will have the edge on the feet in this one. I think Nathaniel Wood will have the clear grappling advantage in this one. So Andre Ewell, his submission game is definitely his weakest aspect. It was not really highlighted by Renan Barão when they fought. He was not really able to successfully get any takedowns or anything like that. But Nathaniel Wood will definitely be looking to take this fight to the floor here. So with the guy with more paths to victory, I think is going to be Nathaniel Wood. So I'm going to have to pick him in this one. But in terms of betting lines, I think there's not too much value on either money line in this one. And I think that a lot of people are playing, the under, and the fight doesn't go the distance, but I think these guys are pretty well matched up, and they will end up going the distance. So that's the play there. Next fight in the lightweight division, we have BJ Penn, who is 16-12-2, taking on Ryan Hall, who is 6-1. Ryan Hall opened up as the -190 favorite. BJ Penn at +165. BJ Penn is now all the way up to +375. People betting down Ryan Hall all the way down to -470. So massive line movement coming in on Ryan Hall in this one, and rightfully so. It's a very favorable matchup for Ryan Hall. He's coming off of about 2 years of inactivity. Last win over Gray Maynard, I believe it was two Decembers ago. Let me check the date on this one. December 3rd, 2016. So no real fights that were interesting. Ryan Hall, he wasn't, getting good offers, and he got an exciting offer in which BJ Penn is his opponent. BJ Penn is, there's, not much to say about him. He's, the former pound for pound fighter, former champion in multiple weight classes. One of the, best fighters to ever walk the earth at one point, but man, he's just had such a steep drop off in his past, decade, man. It is sad that this guy is still fighting. He had that legendary performance over Diego Sanchez where he's licking the blood off his gloves. All of a sudden, he suffers 2 losses in a row to Frankie Edgar. He bounced back with a quick win over Matt Hughes, and then all of a sudden, a draw, loss. So his past 5 fights, he has lost. 6 fights he is winless in his last 6, including that draw. Fighting, terrific competition. Nick Diaz, Rory McDonald, Frankie Edgar, Yair Rodriguez, and then Dennis Seaver in his most recent fight. He's facing a little bit of a step down in competition in this one, and Ryan Hall. But man, it's sad that BJ Penn has cried at the UFC multiple times, saying how that he needs to give it up and how he doesn't have it anymore and how all this shit, and he just keeps coming back and keeps fighting. I don't get it. I really don't get it. It's like, why, man? He's really tarnished his legacy as one of the greats for, coming back repetitively and losing fights repetitively and, not really looking too good in there any of the times. Maybe against Dennis Seaver he looked all right, but he, for the most part, has looked pretty bad in his past 5 fights. So Ryan Hall is, is a jiu-jitsu champion, world jiu-jitsu champion, and a purple belt. I think he didn't get gold as at Gracie Worlds, but he did get gold as a purple belt, not as a black belt. However, still high level jiu-jitsu, some of the best jiu-jitsu in the UFC right now. BJ Penn is a black belt of his own, but he got his black belt 18 years ago, and he competed at black belt 18 years ago. Well, Ryan Hall has competed at black belt within the past decade, so there's going to be a huge difference on the ground, despite them both being black belts. I expect Ryan Hall to be playing the leg lock game, butt scooting, trying to pull guard, get BJ Penn down to the ground. BJ Penn's going to want to try to avoid that and try to keep the fight standing. So it has the massive potential to be, a boring fight, a Ryan Hall scorecards because BJ Penn's just running away the entire time. It has that potential to play out that way. Hopefully it doesn't. Hopefully we get to see some decent grappling exchanges. They're honestly their closest. I think Ryan Hall will honestly get the better of the exchanges on the feet with BJ Penn. BJ is just so far past his prime that Hall will be able to outstrike him, and I think that on the ground it's a little more evenly matched up. So hopefully we get to see some scrambles and some submission attempts, and get an exciting fight. But a high potential of a stinker in this one. But the pick is going to be Ryan Hall. Next fight in the bantamweight division, we have Peter Yan, who is 10-1, taking on Douglas de Silva Andrade, who is 25-2. The betting line for this one opened up Peter Yan as the favorite at -130, Douglas Silva de Andrade at +110. And since then, Peter Yan has been bet down to -310 all the way. De Andrade is all the way up to +255. So massive money coming in on Peter Yan, rightfully so, man. Peter Yan should be a huge favorite in this one, I think. He has really impressed me so far in the UFC with his 2 wins, knockout win over Teruto Ishihara, and his decision win over Sun is the gentleman's name, Jisoo Sun, in his last fight. He's just got terrific boxing, real pop in his hands. He's only had 1 loss in his career, and that was a really close, hard-fought split decision, and he ended up retaliating that loss, beating his only opponent to beat him, Magomedov, in ACB. Is just a terrific fighter of his own right. So he has Peter Yan has fought not only some of the best bantamweights and flyweights in Russia, but he's also now coming over to the United States and taking on some of the top guys over here. So he ran through Teruto Ishihara really quick, and Son, his hands just looked so good in that one. He's got super fast hands, good combinations, good cardio, high output. But Douglas Silva Andrade is, he's a tough motherfucker too. He throws hard, he throws bombs, he likes to sit in the pocket and trade. He only has 2 losses in his career to Zubario Tukhtonov and Rob Font, 2 high-level opponents. But other than that, he's unbeaten. Most of his wins coming by knockout. This dude throws bombs, man. He likes to just march forward and throw punches. He's got decent cardio too, beating Marlon Vera by decision in his most recent fight. So these two, I think they're gonna stand in on the feet and trade. It's gonna be a highly entertaining bout. I think that Peter Yan is just gonna be quicker. His hands are gonna be landing the better shots, and I think that he's gonna win mostly of a boxing match in this one, possibly knocking out Andrade in this one. But I think it'll be pretty close on maybe for the first round, but I think that Yan will pick up his output in the latter rounds and win a decision, or possibly score a late knockout on Andrade in this one. So the pick is going to be Peter Yan. And in the main event of the prelims, in the women's featherweight division, we have Megan Anderson, who is 7-3, taking on Kat Zingano, who is 10-1. The betting line for this one opened up Kat Zingano as the -110 favorite. Megan Anderson is -110 favorite, so pick 'em fight at -110 in this one. Looking over at 5 dimes right now, a lot of money has come in on Kat Zingano, pushing her down to -150, while Megan Anderson has shot up to +130. So I agree with the line movement in this one. Man, a couple surprising openers. I haven't really mentioned them. If I saw openers on Zingano at -110, that's you hit that. Peter Yan at -130, hit that. Ryan Hall at -190. Hit that, man. Those are all super wide openers on it. I can't believe that they opened as that. The past 3 fights have had pretty crazy openers. Well, maybe we'll keep the train rolling in the next fight. But getting back to Zingano versus Anderson in this one, Megan Anderson making her UFC debut in her last fight against Holly Holm. Not exactly an easy fight to make your debut in, but it wasn't. It's not like she just got outstruck cleanly. She got really just outworked in all aspects of MMA. She was outstruck and outgrappled, outwrestled, everything. She showed pretty bad takedown defense pretty bad, jiu-jitsu bad ability off her back, and that's against a striker in Holly Holm, a girl who really hasn't wrestled that much in her career, and now she's facing a wrestler or a fighter who's predominantly a wrestler, likes making fights gritty, going for takedowns, pushing against the cage, landing clinch strikes, going for ground and pound, and that's going to be bad news for Megan Anderson. I really don't see. She's not going to be good enough to outstrike her for 3 rounds. She's not going to be able to keep Zingano at bay. Maybe she can keep her off for a round or two and maybe squeak out a couple rounds. I really do not see Megan Anderson winning decision. The only chance I see Megan Anderson in winning this fight is landing some clean punches on the feet and rocking Zingano and maybe going for a TKO or KO possibly. Because Zingano is just going to be she's going to be tenacious with the takedown. She's going to be chasing it nonstop. She's never going to let up off the gas pedal. She's got good cardio. She can, drag the fight into the latter rounds and, keep up some good output in there as well. So Kat Zingano, man, she's a fierce fighter, and I think that she's going to make this fight a wrestling gritty type fight, and I think she'll get the takedowns and she will secure a decision win, possibly even getting a submission over Megan Anderson in this one. So the pick is going to be Zingano, and even at -150, I think there's a little bit of value on her. All right, moving on to the pay-per-view main card, we have. Oh wait, excuse me. One more prelim. I jumped the gun a little bit. One more prelim. We have Andre the Pitbull Arlovski, who is 27-17, taking on Walt Harris, who is 11-7. Andre Arlovski opened up as the +150 underdog to Walt Harris at -175. Looking over at 5 dimes right now, we see Walt Harris -165, Andre Arlovski at +145. So not much action coming in on this one. The line has stayed fairly the same. I think that I would agree with it. This one, Walt Harris is he's an athletic guy. He throws with a lot of power on the feet. He's much more athletic than Andre Arlovski's most recent opponents. I would put that out there pretty early. He was winning that fight against Mark Godbeer, and then he got DQ'd by some illegal kick. Coming off of a win off of Daniel Spitz as well. He's looked good in the UFC so far, man. He's picked up wins over Cody East, Chase Sherman, Cyril Asker. Also has had really close losses to Shamil Abdurmanikov and Mark Godbeer. A lot of people thought he won those fights. The Godbeer one I mentioned, the DQ. But he's taken on Andre Arlovski, who is a veteran fighter. He was a former UFC heavyweight champion. He's had his ups and downs throughout his UFC career, and it seemed like he was just coming off of an up, man. He picked up two decision wins in a row over Albini and Struve, and then he dropped 2 decisions in a row to Taivusa and Shamil Abdurmanikov. So he's going up and down again, and I think that Walt Harris is going to pose a little bit of problems for him. Arlovski just, he usually wins against low output strikers like Struve and Albini. I don't think that Walt Harris is, fairly low output, but I just think that his power and his athleticism are going to give Andre problems. I really don't think that, Arlovski, man, he's very active. I'll give him that. This is his 4th fight in 2018, but he just doesn't have it anymore. He, doesn't look very fast. He doesn't have much power in his hands at all. He relies on, leg kicks and maybe, a jab every now and then. He's, definitely a declining fighter at this point. So, the pick is going to be Walt Harrison to get this one done in this fight, and not really looking forward to this one too much. But the main card of this pay-per-view is fucking electric. Let me tell you something. 5 great fights. I think 3 of them are absolutely tremendous, and we have 2 other very good fights as well. So starting things off with one of the tremendous ones, I would say Chad Mendes in this fight. This fight is taking place in the featherweight division. Chad Mendes, who is 18-4, taking on Alexander Volkanovski, who is 18-1. The betting line for this one opened up Chad Mendes as the -175 favorite, Alexander Volkanovski as the +150 underdog. Volkanovski is currently at +140, Chad Mendes at -160. So a lot of movement coming in on this one. It's been bouncing up and down all week. both of these guys are very good wrestlers. One is there's a huge difference though. One is a good Australian wrestler, and one is a good American wrestler. The American wrestler has wrestled in high school and college and has really good D1 experience. While Volkanovski has showed great wrestling in the UFC, but in terms of his his raw wrestling ability, I think that Chad Mendes is much better in that department. But this fight is just very interesting. It's Volkanovski's first really elite level opponent, I believe, and there's still a lot of unknown about Chad Mendes coming off of his long layoff. He did have a 2-year layoff, and he came back from it in his last fight against Miles Jury and knocked him out in the first round. But he didn't really get to show too much in that. He didn't really show too much wrestling. He obviously showed that his striking and his power is still there, but he didn't get to show his, the diversity of his game, his cardio, his wrestling, everything that we wanted to see. While Alexander Volkanovski in his last fight did show a little bit of everything, and he showed good wrestling, good ground and pound, good control, good striking on the feet as well. So I think that Volkanovski is I just lean his way a little bit for some reason. I think that he's been more active. He's shown the ability to have high output through 15 minutes. He showed power on the feet. He showed good wrestling. Mendes hasn't shown off his wrestling, his top control in a while. I think that Volkanovski is gonna try to make. There's gonna be a lot of scrambles in this fight, and I think that Volkanovski actually has a good chance of coming out on top of these wrestling scrambles where they're going for takedowns, defending takedowns, threatening with submissions, and mixing in some striking as well. So I think this is gonna be a really high action, exciting fight. Really hoping for a good competitive one. And the pick is going to be Alexander Volkanovski to pull off the underdog impressive win against Chad Mendes in this one. Next fight in the light heavyweight division, we have Ilir Latifi, who is 14-5, taking on Corey Anderson, who is 11-4. The betting line for this one opened up Ilir Latifi as the favorite. This was a pick'em fight at -110, -110. Very interesting line in that one. We now have Ilir Latifi as the -145 favorite to Corey Anderson at +125. This is another very good fight, and I'm gonna we'll break it down why. We have Ilir Latifi, who is a very powerful striker. He's very short. He's very short for the light heavyweight division at at 5'8", but he packs a punch to go along with that. We saw him rock a lot of his opponents. Most recently, Ovince St. Preux, he rocked him with a punch and then he choked him unconscious with a guillotine choke. So he's got good submissions, as well as really good striking and power. So I think that this one he's got good wrestling and takedowns as well. So I think that Corey Anderson is going to want to keep this fight standing. Fight behind the jab. He's looked really good on the feet lately. He's looked good cardio wise, picking up a couple of nice decision wins over Glover Teixeira and Patrick Cummins. So I think that Corey Anderson might be the better striker in this spot, but he has a good chance of getting caught by one of Ilir Latifi's punches. He's not really had the best chin at times. He's gotten knocked out a few times in his UFC career. So he's definitely a fighter that is there to be hit, and he's got a little bit of a chin issue. So I think that Ilir Latifi has a good chance of catching Corey Anderson with a bomb, and he's got a good chance of mixing up levels on the with the takedown. So I think that Ilir Latifi has more pass to win this fight, although I think Corey Anderson will make it very competitive. He'll show some good takedown defense, and if his takedown defense is there, then I could see him taking over the later rounds, and outscoring Ilir Latifi towards a decision. So I expect a really close, even fight in this one, and the pick is going to be Ilir Latifi to get the win. Next fight in the welterweight division, we have Carlos Condit, who is 30-12, taking on Mike Chiesa, who is 13-4. The betting line for this one opened up Carlos Condit as the +105 underdog, Mike Chiesa at -125. People are betting down Chiesa all the way to -170. Carlos Condit up to +150. A lot of action coming in on both sides of this fight. Carlos Condit actually went up to, I think, almost to 2-1 at one point. So he's a little bit of money coming in on him since then. And this is a very interesting fight. Michael Chiesa is making the changing weight classes, going up to 170 pounds in this one. Has had struggle with the weight cut and had a couple tough losses at 55, so he decided to take his talents to 70. And Carlos Condit, man, really struggling as of lately. I think he's lost 3 in a row. I know he lost to Alex Oliveira by choke in that one. He lost to Neil Magny, Damian Maia, and Robbie Lawler. So 4 losses in a row. His last win was in 2015, man. That's insane. 3.5 years without a win for Carlos Condit. So very tough to pick him in this spot, honestly. Although he's taking on a fighter who, in my opinion, sucks. Mike Chiesa sucks. You saw in his last fight, man, he freaking waving his finger at his opponent, acting like a kick didn't hurt him, then gets dropped with a punch as he's, waving his finger, acting like he's not hurt. Gets dropped with a punch and he gets triangle choked as he's supposed to be. He's supposed to be a submission specialist, right? Well, why are 3 of his losses in the UFC by submission? And I don't know. I always thought he sucked. He's got a couple decent submission wins over Jim Miller and Beneil Dariush. Both of those guys are black belts. But man, he's he just doesn't really look too good on the ground for being a so-called ground specialist. So Mike Chiesa is just a really underwhelming fighter. I think his striking really sucks, and his wrestling is no good. Obviously, his chokes are good. He's got good submissions, but his wrestling is nothing special. So I think Carlos Condit will win the striking exchanges easily in this fight. But Carlos Condit's takedown defense, his submission defense, his jiu-jitsu has always sucked. His grappling has always sucked. It's never gotten better in the past 10 years. He's one of the most stagnant fighters in my memory, honestly. It's really unfortunate because he's a terrific striker. He's got terrific cardio, great kicks, great boxing, a really tough, gritty fighter. But man, his Achilles heel is that grappling. He's really he lost that close decision. Honestly, I really thought he won that fight against Robbie Lawler. Could have been the champion, and then all of a sudden goes on to get out-grappled in 2 of his fights, and just Neil Magny really just outclassed him. He looked terrible in that fight. So Carlos Condit fought the same time last year. Like I said, against Neil Magny, looked really, really bad. So hopefully he could look a little bit better. Hopefully he can make this fight entertaining and make it competitive on the feet, and get his striking going. But I honestly think that Mike Chiesa will somehow get this fight to the ground, and he will at some point get a choke in of some sort, take the back of Condit and get the submission. So the pick is going to be Michael Chiesa to win, most likely by decision. Now, in the title fights, the co-main event of the evening, a women's super fight between the UFC women's featherweight champion Christine Cyborg Justino, who is 20-1, and the UFC bantamweight champion Amanda the Lioness Nunes, who is 16-4. The betting line for this one opened up Cyborg as the -300 favorite, and Amanda Nunes at +230. Line margins tighten up a little bit. Cyborg's currently at -240, while Amanda Nunes is at +220. And the betting line is, Nunes' line staying a little bit the same, but a little bit of action coming in on Nunes, so shrinking Justino's line down a little bit. So it's a very, very competitive fight, I believe. It's, a true super fight. True. 2 women at the top of their game, champions taking on one another at 145-pound division. I really can't wait for this fight. It's gonna be a great striking battle. Both of these women are, great on the ground as well, but they really like to strike. They both are, boxers, I would say, is their specialty. They both have very heavy hands. I think Amanda Nunes has faster hands, but I think Cyborg throws with more power. Amanda Nunes showing off her good cardio in her last fight, taking the fight 5 rounds against, Raquel Pennington and getting that finish in the 5th round. Cyborg also, was her last fight against Holly Holm a year ago? I think it was. No, she fought Kunitskaya, that's right. Kunitskaya taking her out in there in 1 round. That was a really easy fight, but Holly Holm, she, had a really competitive fight with Cyborg around this time last year. Holm arguably won the first 2 rounds of that fight, and then Cyborg really showed her, her veteran, I don't even know. just her veteran abilities by taking that fight into the latter rounds, making the necessary adjustments, and winning the rounds 3, 4, and 5 to a decision in that one. So impressive victory for Cyborg in that one. She, has also, beaten Leslie Smith, Lena Landsberg, Tony Evinger, a lot of good girls in the UFC. I think Amanda Nunes, though, has fought and beaten the better competition in the UFC. Ronda Rousey, Miesha Tate, Raquel Pennington, Shevchenko twice, Sarah McMahon, Jermaine Durandame. That win looks terrific. So I think Amanda Nunes has the better strength of schedule. I think that Amanda Nunes is has always been affected by that weight cut. She's actually, I think, had some weight cutting troubles before, and I think that going up to 145 pounds will benefit her immensely, while Cyborg is making that tough cut to 145 like she is used to. A very, very famous fighter for having an awful weight cut is Cyborg. So I think this fight is going to be razor thin. I think that these boxing exchanges are going to be back and forth. I think Amanda Nunes will be landing hard jabs and hard punches, and I think Cyborg will be countering with big power shots and, getting the respect of Nunes. So it really comes down to, who will be landing the more effective shots in this one. I think Amanda Nunes will win some rounds in some judges' minds based on output and based on landing more shots, and I think the Cyborg will win some rounds in judges' minds based on, power and the fact that, maybe backing Nunes up. So, man, I think this one is going to decision. I think that it's going to be a really close decision. Honestly, I think we could be due for a 48-47 split type of thing, and one of the best women's fights of all time, I think we're in for. So, really looking forward to this one. And with how close it is, with how close I think it is, I think that it's crazy that Amanda Nunes is plus 240 or whatever she is now, plus 220. I think that if there's value on this fight, it is on Amanda Nunes, the underdog. So the pick, man. I'm gonna side with my girl Amanda, man. I think that she's gonna be jabbing Cyborg up. She's gonna be maybe swelling up her eyes, cutting her, getting some blood in her eyes, making this fight really dirty. I think Amanda Nunes even maybe mix in that takedown. I think that she could maybe win a few grappling exchanges against Cyborg. Cyborg, I think, is pretty rusty on the ground. We really, really don't see her on the ground much. While Nunes, we have seen grapple a bit more recently in the octagon. So I'm gonna side with Nunes in this one, and I think that we might even see the new double champion in this one. So really looking forward to this fight. And in the main event, the fight we mentioned earlier, the ever so famous Jon Jones, who is undefeated at 22 wins and 1 disqualification loss, against Alexander Gustafson, who is 18-4. The betting line for this one opened up Jon Jones as the minus 200 favorite to Alexander Gustafson at plus 170. Money coming in on Jon Jones, shifting him to a minus 255 favorite, while Alexander Gustafson is plus 235. So these two gentlemen have fought before. One of the most epic fights in UFC history, going down to UFC 165, September 22nd, 2013. Over 5 long years ago, this rematch was scheduled for UFC 178, and then it fell through, and Cormier came in, and then they rebooked that fight for 182, and then, Jones and Cormier had their rivalry, and we have never gotten that Alexander Gustafson rematch, but now it is here, the rematch between Gustafson and Jon Jones. So Jon Jones, undefeated, never lost in the UFC, never lost in the octagon, has beaten every man he's ever fought. And what can you say? What more can you say about him? He's the greatest fighter of all time. He's got great kicks, great fight IQ, great submissions, good wrestling. Power in his hands. He's got everything. He's truly one of a kind. The best fighter who has ever walked this earth. Alexander Gustafson is a very legit opponent, though. He's their fight before was really close. It was I think Jon Jones' closest fight of his career. And Gustafson has looked great since then. He's beaten Jan Blachowicz by decision. That win looks really good considering how good Blachowicz has looked lately. And he also has a knockout win over Glover Teixeira. He's been a little bit inactive though. Hasn't really fought in close to 18 months. Even more inactive than Jon Jones, considering Jon Jones is coming off of a 15-month suspension too. So Gustafson's been facing a little bit of injuries and hasn't really been as active as he wanted to. But regardless, he is a great boxer. He's got good hands, fast hands, power in the hands. He's got the ability to throw some knees and some clinching in there as well. He's even taken Jon Jones down before too, so he could even wrestle or grapple with him. But I just think his defense is a little flawed. Alexander Gustafsson likes running around the cage a little bit. He likes, he likes just bad defense is what I would say Gustafsson's biggest problem is, and that's just not going to fly against Jon Jones, man. He will catch you. He will throw a head kick up there. He will time you. He will, set things up beautifully. He's got incredible fight IQ, incredible instincts, incredible setups. Everything about Jon Jones is just, great. So I think that, throughout, I don't think it'll be finished. I don't think that there'll be a finish in this fight. I think it's, they went the 5 hard rounds before. I think they're going to be familiar with one another. I think their ring rust is going to play a factor. Neither of them have fought in close to 18 months, so I think there's going to be a feeling out process. The first couple rounds will be a little bit slow. There's a chance there's maybe they're setting something up in the first couple rounds and then they land that power shot in the 3rd, 4th, or 5th, causing the knockout. But I really don't think that's going to happen. I think this fight will go to the decision. I do really see Jon Jones ultimately winning 4 rounds. Maybe it'll be close and be like the first fight, maybe be 3-2 or something like that. But I think that Jon Jones will win this one. With all the news of the steroid test, the trace amounts, I fully believe that Jon Jones is on steroids for this fight. So I think that we will see, a charged up, juiced up Jon Jones in there. He will be stronger, faster than ever. He will be, looking to make a statement coming back from his long layoff, trying to silence all the haters and the doubters, and put himself in position to fight Daniel Cormier for that heavyweight belt at some point in 2019. That is definitely the fight, the money fight, the trilogy fight at heavyweight, which is what everyone would love to see. The 205 champ versus 265 champ. So that'll be a great one. So in terms of this main event, I don't think Gustafson is going to have the ability to beat Jon in this one. I don't think he has shown enough adjustments, enough improvements, enough activity to think that he will beat Jon Jones in this rematch if he did not beat him in their first fight. It was a pretty clear Jon Jones win in their first fight. A lot of people disagree with the decision in the moment. So no one had ever really fought Jon Jones to a competitive decision before. So a lot of people thought that Gustafson won that the night of. But you go back and you rewatch it and you realize that fight was pretty clear Jon Jones win. So the pick is going to be Jon Bones Jones to add another victim to the undefeated list. So that will be all for the UFC 232 show. It all that crazy drama with it moving from Vegas to California, we recapped in the beginning. So but top to bottom, what an incredible card, what a great card to close out the year, close out the Fox Sports 1 era. It's got some incredible matchups. I really think there's a lot of close coin flip type fights in this fight. On this card, it's really even hard to pick a lot of these fights. Who you think's gonna be a winner? So I think there'll be some great live betting spots as usual, and I recommend BetDSI. Recommend 5 dimes for all your live betting fight lines. And with that being said, we are going to quickly recap the UFC on Fox 31 card that went down 2 weeks ago. We'll just quickly run through all these fights because we don't like to miss too many fights. here. And starting things off, we had Juan Adams defeat Chris De La Rocha by TKO. Juan Adams looking really good in there. His boxing was on point just like we expected, and man, he put an absolute beating on Chris De La Rocha in this one. Almost hard to watch at some point. Just absolute mauling. Chris De La Rocha is too tough for his own good. He's not really UFC caliber though. He's not a good fighter, and I think it's time for him to wrap it up. Next fight, Mike Rodriguez defeating Adam Milstead by knee to the body and some ground and pound. Beautiful finish from Mike Rodriguez, just a picture perfect straight left to the body, following up with a left knee. Just great placement, great power, great performance from Mike Rodriguez in this one. And Adam Milstead, retiring after this fight. Has had some tough fights lately, and that was his last fight. So impressive win for Mike Rodriguez in there. Next fight, we had Dan Ige defeat Jordan Griffin by decision 2-1. Really close fight. Dan Ige winning the first round, Griffin winning the second round, and Ige coming out to win the third. Really, you couldn't possibly argue Jordan Griffin 10-8 that second round. I don't really know. I think that Jordan Griffin could have snuck out the decision, although I was on Jordan Griffin, his decision line though, so I'm obviously biased. But very close fight from these both gentlemen. Dan Ige, that was really underwhelming so far, has not impressed me at all, and despite the loss, I think Jordan Griffin looks pretty good. Next fight, really awful, boring fight. Zach Cummings defeating Trevor Smith by decision. Just terrible fight. Honestly, I think Trevor Smith did more in this fight to win. Maybe I thought he deserved a decision. So, but that's enough said about that one. Jack Hermansson just running through Gerald Miesha, man, just dominating the top position. Filthy ground and pound, and then submitting Gerald Miesha, the submission artist himself. Just an incredible performance from Jack Hermansson, and he really shows a versatile game. Next fight, the fight of the night. Joaquim Silva defeated Jared Gordon by knockout in the third round. An incredible fight, back and forth. Jared Gordon was, winning the first round, rocked Silva at the end of the first round, won the first. The second was going back and forth, and then in the third round, these guys were just throwing down, and eventually Jared Gordon was caught with a few clean punches and knocked out. More of a TKO, honestly, I think, but incredible performance from both of them. Joaquim Silva dug real deep, showed some good cardio like has been his problem before, and just great fight of the night from these two gentlemen. Next fight, we had Jakar Close defeat Bobby Green in a very close decision. Jakar Close was a pretty big favorite in this one. Bobby Green looked pretty good in there for being that big of an underdog, but Jakar Close ultimately outpointing Bobby Green by a slight margin. Next fight, we had Zach Otto defeat Dwight Grant in a highway robbery of a decision. Very low output fight, but it was a clear Dwight Grant decision. I would, not use robbery very, very lightly in some circumstances, but this one was a robbery. It was no way Zach Otto won that fight. It's absolutely criminal to give that fight to that guy. It makes no sense at all, but regardless. Moving on to the main card, we had Charles Oliveira run through Jim Miller, taking him down and choking him out in 75 seconds via rear naked choke. Very impressive performance from Oliveira. Rob Font defeats Sergio Pettis by a dominant decision. Rob Font's jab was on point in this fight. It was lighting Sergio up on the feet for the entire 15 minutes, and a great performance from Rob Font. Another back and forth crazy fight, Edson Barbosa versus Dan Hooker. Crazy amount of kicks going back and forth in this fight, and eventually Edson Barbosa accumulating a massive amount of damage, resulting in the finish via knockout of Dan Hooker in the third round. Just an incredible fight from Edson Barbosa. Both gentlemen, Dan Hooker is tough as nails, and Barbosa just looks terrific in there, bouncing back off his two really bad losses. So good to see him back. And in the main event, Raging Al Iaquinta pulls off the huge upset over Kevin Lee, beating him by decision 2 rounds to 3, or 3 rounds to 2 cards, and 4 rounds to 1-on-1. just a really impressive performance from Ali Quinta. His boxing was on point. His sub defense was on point. His takedown defense was great. He he got his back taken a couple times, but he defended both of those times. Was able to avoid the very dangerous chokes of Kevin Lee, and he was able to really dominate the striking exchanges. And for the majority of the fight in this one, Ali Quinta just looked great. His boxing was on point. His cardio was great. He was landing hard shots in the latter round. Almost looked like he was going for a finish in the last 30 seconds. Could have possibly finished that fight if it went one more round, but he really dug deep after getting his back taken and whatnot, and really securing those rounds necessary. And despite being a big 2.5 underdog or plus 250 underdog, Ali Quinta pulled out the impressive victory in that one. So great performance from Ali Quinta in that fight. Alright, so we just recapped the UFC on Fox 31, the last Fox card, the end of an era. It's a, great era, but like I said in the previous episodes, the ratings had just been steadily declining for a long time, and it was time for the program to go. We're looking forward to the new future of the ESPN era, UFC on ESPN. It'll be a pretty surreal sight to see the UFC on ESPN. So with that being said, we recapped that event and we broke down the entire UFC 232 controversy and card in its entirety. So hope you all enjoyed the episode. Hope you all have a great new year, great holiday season. And in the 2018, it's been a pleasure. All 40 episodes, 42 episodes I've done this year. It's been great, and I'm looking forward towards the next year. So ladies, gentlemen, boys, girls, aliens, Martians, any conscious beings tuning into the podcast, I thank you for tuning in to episode 45 of Martian Mixed Martial Arts, and I will catch you all in 2019. Peace.